I used to work late shifts at a small grocery store just outside town. This was back in 2018, during my second year of college. The place was open 24 hours, but after midnight, it was usually dead. Maybe one or two customers every half hour. Most nights were uneventful. I'd restock shelves, clean up, and occasionally ring someone up. Around 2 a.m., it got especially quiet. That was the part I actually liked. It felt like the world had paused for a bit. One night in early November, it was colder than usual. I remember because the automatic doors kept letting in drafts every time they opened, even slightly. I had my jacket on behind the counter, which I normally didn't need. At around 2:15, the doors slid open, but I didn't hear footsteps right away. That wasn't too unusual. Sometimes people lingered by the entrance or checked their phone before coming in. I looked up anyway, just out of habit. There was a man standing just inside the doorway. He wasn't doing anything strange at first glance, just standing there, hands in his pockets. Hoodie, jeans, nothing unusual. But he hadn't moved since the doors opened. I gave it a few seconds, then said, "Hey, let me know if you need anything." He didn't respond, didn't nod, didn't look at me either, at least not directly. It felt like he was looking past me, somewhere deeper into the store. I remember thinking maybe he had headphones in. So I went back to what I was doing, which was organizing the cigarette display behind the counter. Still, I kept glancing up every few seconds. He was still in the same spot. After maybe a minute, he finally started walking, but not toward the aisles. He walked along the front of the store parallel to the windows, slow, almost like he was counting steps. Then he stopped near the end of the counter, about 5 feet away from me. That's when he looked at me properly, not aggressive, not angry, just focused, like he was trying to decide something. I gave a small nod, the kind you do when you're not sure what else to do. "You good?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said very quietly, "What time do you close?" I told him we were open all night. He held my gaze for a second longer than felt normal, then looked around the store again. "Right," he said. "I forgot." That didn't really make sense, but I didn't question it. He turned and walked down one of the aisles. I could hear his footsteps for a bit, then nothing. I figured he was just browsing. A couple minutes passed, then 5. I realized I hadn't heard anything from that aisle in a while. No movement, no items being picked up, nothing. I leaned slightly to the side to get a better angle, but from the counter you can't see very far down the aisles, just the ends of them. "Hey," I called out, not too loud, "you finding everything okay?" No response. At that point, I assumed he was just one of those quiet customers. It happens. Still, something about it felt off. Hard to explain. Maybe it was how long he'd been in there without making any noise. I stepped out from behind a counter and walked a few steps toward the aisle he went into. I didn't go all the way in, just far enough to look down it. It was empty. No one there. I remember just standing there for a second, trying to figure out if I'd somehow missed him leaving. There's only one entrance, the same doors I was facing the whole time, and I never heard them open again. I checked the next aisle, then the one after that. Nothing. I even went to the back storage room thinking maybe he had wandered back there even though customers weren't supposed to. Empty. At that point, I felt that kind of uneasiness you get when something small doesn't add up. I went back to the counter and checked the security monitor. We had a few cameras, not great quality, but enough to see movement. I rewound it a minute or two. I could see myself behind the counter, the doors opening, cold air pushing in, but there was no one standing there. I remember thinking the timestamp must be off, so I rewound further. Same thing. Doors open. No one. I let it play forward. A few seconds later, I looked up on screen like I had in real life, but there was still no one there. I watched the entire sequence again, this time paying attention to the aisle. At some point, I saw myself step out from behind the counter and walk toward it, but there was never anyone going in. I turned off the monitor. I didn't really know what to do with that. For the rest of the shift, I stayed behind the counter. Didn't go near that aisle again unless I absolutely had to. Nothing else happened that night. Around 6 a.m., the morning guy came in. I didn't tell him about it. It sounded stupid even in my own head. But before I left, I checked the entrance one more time. There was a thin strip of moisture on the floor just inside the doors, like something wet had been standing there for a while. I guess it could have been from the cold air, or maybe someone had actually come in and I just missed it somehow. I still work late shifts sometimes, just at a different place now. And every now and then, when the doors open and no one walks in right away, I catch myself waiting a little longer than I used to. This happened about 2 years ago, when I was still living in a shared apartment near the edge of the city. There were 3 of us, but that week, I was the only one home. The others were visiting family, so I basically had the place to myself. It was a quiet neighborhood. Not isolated, but not busy either. At night, you'd maybe hear a car pass every now and then, but that was it. I was up late most nights back then, usually watching something or just scrolling on my phone. Around 1 or 2 a.m., the apartment would get completely silent. One night, I heard someone walking in the hallway outside my door. That wasn't unusual by itself. The building had 4 units on the same floor, so people coming and going wasn't rare. But what caught my attention was how slow the steps were. Not like someone just heading to their apartment. More like they were lingering. I paused the video I was watching and listened. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I remember thinking they were probably just checking which apartment was theirs. Maybe a guest or someone who wasn't familiar with the layout. So I didn't move. A few seconds passed. Then I heard a very light knock. Not the kind you do when you're trying to get someone's attention. More like testing if someone's there. I didn't answer. Again, I assumed it was a mistake. Then, after a short pause, the doorknob moved. Not fully, just a slight turn, like someone checking if it was locked. That's when I sat up. I was pretty sure I had locked it earlier, but I still got that moment of doubt where you're not completely certain. The handle stopped moving. Then nothing, no footsteps, no voices, just silence again. I stayed still for a while, listening, expecting to hear them walk away, but I didn't hear anything. Eventually, I got up and walked quietly to the door. I didn't open it. I just stood there for a second, looking at the handle. Then I checked the peephole. The hallway was empty. That part didn't feel right. Even if someone had turned around immediately, I should have at least heard them leave. I unlocked the door slowly and opened it just a little. No one there. I stepped into the hallway and looked both ways. Completely empty. All the other doors were closed. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds just listening. Nothing. I went back inside and locked the door again, this time double-checking it. I told myself it was just someone who realized they had the wrong apartment and left quickly. That made sense. At least it did enough for me to go back to my room. About 20 minutes later, I heard the same footsteps again. Same slow pace. Same direction. They stopped outside my door. I didn't move this time. I just sat there, staring at the door. There was no knock. Just the sound of someone standing there. I could tell because of the slight shifting, like weight being moved from one foot to the other. Then, after a few seconds, I heard something else. Breathing. Very quiet, but close. Right on the other side of the door. I don't know how long that lasted. It felt longer than it probably was. Then it stopped. A moment later, I finally heard footsteps again, moving away down the hall. This time, I heard them continue all the way to the end. Then nothing. I didn't open the door again that night. The next morning, I checked with the neighbors. The apartment across from me was empty. The people there were on vacation. The one next to me was an older couple. They said they hadn't left their place at all that night, and the last unit belonged to someone who worked night shifts. So technically, it could have been them. But when I asked, they said they hadn't been home. I also checked the front entrance camera later that day. No one had entered the building around that time. I tried to come up with explanations. Maybe I misheard things. Maybe someone had come in earlier, and I just didn't notice. But I can't really explain the breathing or why it stopped exactly when I stopped moving. I still live in apartments, but ever since then, I make sure the door is locked before I go to bed, and I don't check the peephole right away anymore. I usually wait a bit first. This happened last winter when I was still doing delivery driving in a rural area outside the city. It was one of those jobs where you mostly work alone, especially on late shifts. After 9 p.m., there's barely anyone on the roads. That night, I was finishing one of my last deliveries. It was already past 11, and the address was a bit out of the way, down a narrow road surrounded by trees on both sides. I remember checking the GPS twice because it didn't look like the kind of place where people usually ordered food that late. The house was there, though, set back from the road, no lights on except for a faint one near the entrance. I pulled up and grabbed the bag. As I stepped out of the car, I noticed how quiet it was. No wind, no animals, nothing. Just that kind of stillness you don't really think about until you're in it. I walked up to the front door and knocked. No answer. I waited a few seconds and knocked again, a bit louder this time. Still nothing. I checked the app to make sure I had the right address. Everything matched. That's when I noticed the door was slightly open, not wide, just enough to see a thin line of darkness inside. I hesitated for a second, then said, "Hello? Delivery?" No response. I didn't want to just walk in, so I stayed where I was. Then, from somewhere inside, I heard a sound. It was hard to place at first, not loud. More like something shifting slowly, like furniture being moved across a floor, but very faint. I told myself it was probably just someone in the back of the house. So I knocked one more time and waited. Nothing. At that point, I figured I'd just leave the order at the door and go. As I bent down to place the bag, I noticed something on the floor just inside. Marks. At first I thought they were dirt or maybe scuff marks, but when I looked closer, they looked more like lines, parallel lines running across the floor like something had been dragged repeatedly in the same direction. I stood up and stepped back without really thinking about it. That feeling you get when something doesn't sit right. I pulled my phone out to call the customer. It rang for a bit, then went to voicemail. While I was standing there, I heard the sound again. This time a little clearer, a slow dragging noise coming from deeper inside the house. I took another step back. Hello? I called again, louder. No response, just that same sound, stopping and starting. At that point, I decided I was done. I placed the bag right outside the door, took a photo for proof, and turned to leave. As I walked back to my car, I had that feeling like I was being watched. I didn't turn around right away. I just kept walking, trying to act normal. When I reached the car, I opened the door, got in, and locked it. Only then did I look back. The front door was still open, but the light near the entrance had gone out. The house was completely dark now. I sat there for a second, debating whether I should report something or just leave. Then my phone buzzed. A message from the customer. "Where is my order?" I stared at the screen for a moment. I typed back that I had left it at the front door. A few seconds later, another message came in. "I'm not home." I looked up at the house again. Still dark. Still quiet. I didn't wait for another reply. I just started the car and drove off. About 5 minutes down the road, I checked the app again. The order had been marked as delivered, no further messages. I tried to tell myself it was just a mistake. Maybe someone else had access to the house. Maybe I misunderstood something, but I keep thinking about those marks on the floor and the way the sound stopped every time I spoke. I don't take deliveries in that area anymore, and if a door is already open when I get there, I don't go anywhere near it.